Today on Mr. Media, I'll talk to legendary humor writer and editor Tony Hendra, head potentate of the new New York Times parody website, TheFinalEdition.com. Stick around. I'm only starting to put pressure on the poor man to bring the funny. So much media, so little time. Who keeps track of it all? That would be me. This is Bob Andelman, and this is a Mr. Media interview. You know, MrMedia.com, MRMedia.com. Stop by and check it out. There are more than 700 archived celebrity and pop culture interviews for your listening pleasure. The show is brought to you today by Audible. Audible is offering Mr. Media listeners a free audiobook download and a 14-day trial offer to give you a chance to check out their very cool service. I love listening to books on tape. If you've never tried it before, actors or sometimes the authors themselves read to you. It's great for the commute, the beach, or even unwinding before bed. You can choose a free audiobook from Audible's enormous library of titles, including the National Lampoon Radio Hour classics, or titles written by Tony Hendra, including Father Joe, The Man Who Saved My Soul, and The Messiah of Morris Avenue. You could also download The Profiler, written by famed criminal profiler Pat Brown and yours truly, which Pat will read to you personally. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/radio. Again, that's audibletrial.com/radio for your free audiobook. Mr. Media is recorded live before a studio audience that includes alumni from the National Lampoon The Funny Years and Spy The Funny Years in the new media capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida. I always knew of Tony Hendra's magazine work, being of the generation that were teens and then college students during the best years of both the National Lampoon and Spy. But I never really knew Hendra until I read Rick Meyerowitz's book, Drunk, Stoned, Brilliant, Dead, the writers and artists who made the National Lampoon insanely great. Meyerowitz wrote that Hendra was one of the brilliant guys in the book's title. He was also very good at holding his alcohol, apparently. Often, reading the magazine, you can't tell who wrote what, but Tony's prose has a specific gravity. You can feel its weight on the page. His sentences, like shiny steel, fit together with a metallic sound, like the business parts of a Gatling gun locking in place. And his words ring like bullet casings hitting a steel deck after being fired. Okay, am I intimidated to talk to someone that clever? Well, of course. Why do you think I'm relying on Rick Meyerowitz's words instead of my own? Anyway, Tony Hendra is back in the spotlight with the launch of TheFinalEdition.com. It's a broad parody of the New York Times and media in general. Now, you might argue that on any given day, the New York Times itself is but a parody of the New York Times. But that won't deter the likes of Tony Hendra. He has the old gray lady in his sights, and his trigger finger is ready to squeeze. Tony Hendra, welcome to Mr. Media.
Nice to be here, Bob.
Pleasure is all mine. Appreciate your time. And I got to ask you, you've kind of poked your wicked wit in a lot of directions over the decades. But why in 2011 the New York Times? Why not, the Huffington Post, something like that?
Well, there's several answers to that, as always. When you get to my age, there's never just one simple answer. But the main one is because it's there. I mean, it's always worth parodying the New York Times. But the more sort of business-oriented explanation is that I'm actually in the process of launching a website called TheFinalEdition.com. And ultimately, the Final Edition will be its own website. It'll be The Final Edition. And the idea of the Final Edition is that if you like, it's trying to bring to the internet the sort of humor that we had at the Lampoon, the sort of humor that we practiced at Spy, the kind of humor that we expressed when we did Spinal Tap. It's what you might call funny, smart, in the know kind of humor. And the idea here is that that on the internet, in general, there are some notable exceptions, but on the internet, humor tends to be dominated by the sort of frat boy through funny cat video spectrum. And this seemed to me to present an opportunity. So having picked the name The Final Edition, I cast about what would be the most fun way to launch the Final Edition, and I and some of my colleagues had a brainwave, which was, hey, why don't we do the final edition of the New York Times? It's going to die soon anyway, so that'll be really funny. And that's pretty much we came to the conclusion of doing the very fast final edition of the New York Times.
Oh, okay, that makes perfect sense. And it's very sad that we're actually at that point. I mean, did you ever think 20 years ago you'd be talking about a day when you'd be parodying the final edition of the New York Times? Did that ever seem possible?
Well, oddly enough, about a little more than 30 years ago, I did do a parody of the New York Times with some Lampoon friends and a guy called George Plimpton, the wonderful
I do remember
humor.
that.
Yes, it was called Not the New York Times.
Right.
And that was in 1978 when the Times was absolutely at the acme of its power and influence and prestige. And it certainly, the reason we did it then was because we basically loved the Times and respected it, and therefore it had to be torn down and trampled on, which is the basic premise of what I've always done. And the contrast between then, when we were doing a print parody of probably the most important newspaper in the world, and now when we were doing, possibly for the first time, a major parody of an actual website of a newspaper, with the newspaper struggling with a moron as its publisher, and
No, don't hold back. Tell me what you really think.
No, I will. I want to be very careful. But and numerous scandals over the last 10 years, which it's had to endure. It's a very different target, but it remains the old grey lady, and the old grey lady is as constipated as ever, and has its wonderful quirks. So we've had great fun, parodying all those stylistic quirks, except they're now online, and there are many more personalities, so it's much more easier to do and target, and actually it was great fun. It was just as much fun as the first time around.
Now you throw up, pardon me, you throw upon it, not throw up, but you throw upon it the new Fox Times
right.
as the name, which I thought was hysterical because, of course, Rupert Murdoch bought the Wall Street Journal, and has often been wondered if he was going to go after the New York Times at some point.
Well,
that would be the death of the paper, wouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, what we've been doing, we actually launched this in the second week of May, and since then we've been having great fun with the supposed corpse of the New York Times, which all kinds of people have been fighting over in our narrative, at least, including Bono, the Olsen twins, Gaddafi, the Saudi royal family, and numerous others, Lorne Michaels, Mike Tyson, and eventually last week, or the beginning of last week, the Saudi royal family actually acquired the New York Times, and so for the last week before Murdoch came along, for the first time in its history, the New York Times had an Arabic headline, which was great fun, just to see it sitting there. But no, the idea, this is the last bit of fun we're going to have with the New York Times, and it is that Murdoch finally rides to the rescue, as he puts it, and of course completely destroys the newspaper. He appoints Sean Hannity as the editorial director.
Oh, God. Oh, my God. Well, I love the, and then this will take you to my level of humor, which is the Photo Funnies level of humor, but I love the animated Sarah Palin.
Yes, the topless Sarah. She'll do anything for America.
She will.
Yes.
But the thing about that was, I looked at that and I thought, okay, finally I can see something that people who support her see in her, because she looked pretty good topless.
She does. She looks pretty good. I didn't want to insult her.
No.
She's got quite a nice top, and I'm sure she does. But I have to add, just in case there are those people who might be offended by it, not Sarah Palinites. I mean other people who I think we know who we're talking about. I just want to say that it wasn't me that did this. It was Fox News. Okay,
right.
It's Fox News' idea.
Right. Of course. I apologize for being a little off there with my credit. I want to give credit where credit is due.
No, but Sarah dancing topless to "Hail to the Chief" is possibly one of the high and low points of my career.
Well, but now help me here. If this was Fox News that did it, how do we know it was Sarah Palin topless and not Tina Fey?
Because this is a perfect caricature of Sarah Palin, which actually is done in the style of the Wall Street Journal. They do these line drawings,
Right,
these
right.
very famous sort of etchings. And believe it or not, I got the most famous artist who does those actual etchings for the Wall Street Journal to do this caricature. So it's definitely Sarah. It's definitely not Tina.
Who is the artist?
I don't know Tina that well, but I can assure you that is Sarah's top, not Tina's.
All right. Who is the artist, by the way?
His name is Randy Glass, and he's a wonderful guy who works out of L.A. actually, and he's done great illustrations for me before. He actually did a topless Ann Coulter for me about 3 years ago, which went viral on HuffPost insanely. And oddly enough, we didn't hear much from Anne after that. I think it sort of got to her. She'd played very low that year.
Should probably write something in a book or title a book after you, some nice tribute.
Yes.
So
it's amazing. It's amazing that velociraptors actually can write books. It really is.